Welcome back to Plants of the Gods. In this episode, ethnobotanist Dr. Mark Plotkin discusses Brugmansia, the so-called tree of the evil eagle. It has long been used by traditional healers of the Andes Amazon region as an important component of their medicine chest, closely related to the hexing herbs of European witches of the Middle Ages. As detailed in an earlier episode, these fascinating plants can heal or harm.
Hello, everyone. This is Mark Plotkin, ethnobotanist Mark Plotkin, your host for Plants of the Gods. I am the co-founder of the Amazon Conservation Team, www.amazonteam.org on the web. This podcast is brought to you without commercial interruption, and one of the reasons we're doing this is it's supported by the Amazon Conservation Team. So if you support the Amazon Conservation Team, you get to hear this podcast without commercial interruption, and you don't have to listen to me try and sell you detergents of any kind. Today, I want to talk about one of the true plants of the gods, Brugmansia. You may have seen it, you probably haven't heard of it, but I want to start today's episode with one of the greatest quotes ever written about hallucinogens, and I quote, "Psychoactive plants and fungi have played an important role in medicine, religion, ritual life, and recreation since ancient times. In shamanic religions, which appear to have dominated throughout much of human prehistory, trance induced by psychoactive plants and fungi and other techniques permits direct contact with the divine. For this reason, plant hallucinogens and other psychoactive substances have been considered by cultures throughout history as plants of the gods, sacred substances that bring knowledge, power, healing, and mystical insight, but that must be used with utmost respect and caution." That is a quote from one of my favorite ethnobotanists, Dr. Glenn Shepard. He's been on Plants of the Gods previously. He's a wonderful writer and speaker. I want to talk about Brugmansia, and I use that quote because respect and caution are what are required with Brugmansia. But I want to talk about the flower of one species of Brugmansia, Brugmansia sanguinea, because it is the most beautiful hallucinogenic plant on planet Earth. The flower of Brugmansia sanguinea, which is sometimes known as the red angel's trumpet, ranks the most beautiful and breathtaking hallucinogen in the botanical world. Native to the Andean regions of Ecuador, Colombia, and Peru, this species combines exotic elegance with a dramatic visual impact. I consider it to be a masterpiece of evolutionary artistry. What distinguishes this flower from that of other plants, even other species of Brugmansia, is its insanely intense coloration. The upper portion of the trumpet flower is often a deep blood red or crimson, fading into a vivid orange or even golden yellow near the base. The inner throat of the flower often glows with luminescent yellow or green, which is what draws in pollinators and the human gaze. The striking color gradient is not only visually captivating, it's also functionally significant. It contrasts dramatically against the plant's dark green foliage, creating a beacon for the Andean hummingbirds, its primary pollinators. Though all Brugmansias are both toxic and psychoactive, Brugmansia sanguinea is particularly valued by shamans in the Andes with great caution, often in vision quests or rituals. The sheer visual beauty of the flower has symbolic resonance. It hangs like a sacred trumpet from the heavens, bridging the upper world and the spirit realm. In this sense, its beauty is not just aesthetic, but curative and spiritual as well. Now, Brugmansia is commonly known as angel's trumpet. It's also known as tree daturas. It's a genus of flowering plants native to tropical regions of South America. These striking plants have captivated human attention for centuries, if not longer, due to their dramatic pendulous flowers, powerful pharmacological properties, and profound cultural significance. Brugmansia, in fact, represents one of the most fascinating and complex genera in the entire ethnobotanical literature. These stunning flowering shrubs and small trees, native, as I said, to South America, have played a profound role in indigenous cultures for millennia while simultaneously presenting significant risks to human health. Remember, this is not a medical broadcast telling you what plants to use, but we will tell you which plants not to use or to be very, very careful around. The ethnobotany of Brugmansia encompasses traditional medicine, shamanic practices, cultural ceremonies, and modern scientific research, creating a multifaceted narrative that illustrates both the promise and the peril of plant-human relationships. The genus Brugmansia, named after a Dutch botanist Brugmans, was formerly classified within Datura. However, now set apart from Datura and contains 7 recognized species distributed primarily through the Andean region. These plants are distinguished by their large pendulous trumpet-shaped flowers, as I mentioned, that can sometimes reach a length of 50 centimeters, and their potent psychoactive properties derive from tropane alkaloids, primarily scopolamine, atropine, and hyoscyamin. Now, I covered this in great detail in an earlier episode called Hexing Herbs, because they're very much a mainstay of witchcraft rituals in Europe in the Middle Ages. And I want to encourage everyone who is interested in this topic or likes this podcast episode to go back and listen to that podcast episode, because it frames her in a broader way. Brugmansia is very popular in horticulture because the flowers are so stunning, and there is a lot of crossbreeding and stuff, so you get many varieties that don't appear in nature. But we recognize 7 scientific species: Brugmansia arborea, which are white flowers, the greenish base, native to the Andes of Ecuador and Peru, and Brugmansia aurea, which is a very powerful shamanic species, golden yellow flowers, native to the Andes from Colombia to northern Chile, so it has a widespread range. Brugmansia insignis, white flowers that turn yellow with age, native to the Amazon. Brugmansia sanguinea, which I started out with, which is my favorite hallucinogenic flower in the world, which has these remarkable red, orange, or scarlet flowers, which is native to Colombia and Peru and Ecuador. Brugmansia suaveolens, which has white flowers and a very sweet fragrance, native to the Atlantic forest of southeastern Brazil. Brugmansia versicolor, which have the largest flowers in the genus, which range in color from peach to pink, found primarily in Ecuador. And then a species known as Brugmansia volcanicola, which have pink and orange flowers, native to Colombia. As I said, there's many cultivated varieties and hybrids, but most of these are found in indigenous or shamanic gardens in nature. Brugmansia belongs to the Solanaceae family, also known as the nightshade family, which is ironic because it has so many poisonous compounds. The same family also includes staple food crops like potatoes, tomatoes, and eggplants. Also tobacco, belladonna, and mandrake, and I covered some of this in the earlier episode on hexing herbs. Botanically, it's most closely related to Datura. As I said, they were previously classified together. But Datura is different from Brugmansia. All of Brugmansia species are woody trees or at least shrubs, whereas many, if not all, of the Datura species are herbaceous annuals or short-lived perennials. Brugmansia tends to have downward hanging flowers, which are known as pendulous and by botanists, while Datura flowers tend to be erect. So that's the basic difference between those two, although there's overlap in their shamanic uses in South America and other parts of the Americas. Datura is very commonly used in the Old World and in North America, whereas Brugmansia is primarily found and used in indigenous communities in South America. We can date the prehistoric use of Brugmansia back over 300,000 years. Archaeological evidence from pre-Columbian cultures, particularly pottery depicting the characteristic trumpet flowers, and mummified remains containing tropane alkaloids demonstrate the deep historical relationship between these plants and human societies. Shamans have used different parts of Brugmansia to treat conditions ranging from asthma and rheumatism to more complex spiritual ailments. The leaves are commonly prepared as poultices for external applications to treat inflammation, wounds, joint pain, and diabetic ulcers, which Western medicine has a lot of problems treating. In fact, I gave the example that I heard from Colombian shamans who value this plant for its therapeutic purposes, who said if you put one leaf of Brugmansia under your pillow before you go to sleep at night, you'll have wild dreams. But if you have more than three plant leaves, that is, under your pillow, you'll have erotic dreams so powerful you may wake up dead. Now, most of the extensively documented ethnobotanical use of Brugmansia involves its use in shamanic practices and religious ceremonies. Indigenous groups, including the Jivaro, the so-called headhunters from Ecuador and Peru, the Chibcha, who are known from highland Colombia, and some Amazonian tribes have incorporated these plants into their spiritual traditions as powerful entheogens, substance used to facilitate religious or spiritual experiences. Like with datura, the psychoactive effects of Brugmansia are characterized by vivid hallucinations, altered states of consciousness, and perceived communication with spiritual entities, have made these plants central to divination practices, healing ceremonies, and initiation rites. Shamans often consume Brugmansia preparations to enter trance states and allegedly allow them to diagnose disease, communicate with spirits, and guide their communities through spiritual crises. Now, when you do a traditional ayahuasca ceremony in the northwest Amazon, in a place like Colombia, and remember, Colombia I regard as the original home of ayahuasca culture, particularly the Sibundoy Valley in the eastern slope of the Andes in Colombia, and I've talked a lot about that in earlier episodes, and I talked about how successful the Amazon Conservation Team has been in partnering with local indigenous societies and Colombian academics and activists and the Colombian government to protect these cloud forests, ecosystems, in terms of new protected areas, in terms of new models of co-management with indigenous societies. We've made real progress in protecting not only these forests, but protecting or helping to protect the shamanic cultures and empowering them to seize control of their cultural and environmental destiny. More of this is available on our website at amazonteam.org. and on our famous Schulte storybook map done by our cartographic wizard Brian Hetler. And I encourage you to look at this to get more information on how we have successfully partnered with indigenous societies to help them better protect their cultures and their rainforests. But when you undergo a very traditional ayahuasca ceremony with the last of the great ayahuasca masters, which in the Sibundoy Valley are known as taitas, you typically take the brew after the sun has gone down, and then you sit around for 20 minutes until the effects start to come on, and then you have intense spiritual and visionary experience for several hours. But then you wake up around 2 or 3 in the morning to converse with the taita and ask him or her what the visions meant, what the experience meant, and then he or she will often offer you another dose, another round, which will take you through to the morning, and the sun comes up when they give you energy healing, what they call a limpieza, which is them chanting and waving Huayrasacha leaves over you, which they claim pulls out the bad stuff, the stress, the demons, the pain, and gives you the protection to move forward. But I had participated in a ceremony with a very powerful Engano shaman. Remember, the Enganos are the tribe that taught Schultes the use of ayahuasca, 1941, 1942, in the Sibundoy Valley. And the visions lasted for hours and hours and hours, far beyond what was typical. And when I finally came around and was talking to the shaman about why this ceremony lasted so much longer than usual, he smiled, looked at me and said, "Le puse alas a la receta," which means I put wings on the recipe, on the brew, meaning that he had added Brugmansia to the brew to make it last longer in duration and enhance the intensity. Now, Schultheism told me himself that these tropane alkaloids in these plants were the ones that he was most cautious about, and that they should only be used under the care of a master shaman because the downside potential was so great. In fact, accidental poisonings occur not uncommonly in children where these plants are grown as ornamentals. You find certainly datura in southern Florida, and sometimes these plants are mistaken for other plants. The use of Brugmansia for recreational purposes is extremely dangerous. Let me say that again. The use of Brugmansia for recreational plants is extremely dangerous, should be avoided at all costs. The word Brugmansia and recreation should never appear in the same sentence, and people who've made this mistake have ended up in hospital or dead worldwide. Public health and poison control centers consistently warn against any unauthorized experimentation with these plants. And let me give you an example of how a related plant, that is datura, was regarded in Mexico. This is an account by one of my favorite fellow ethnobotanists, Bob Bly, who worked with the peyote cults in Mexico, one of Schulte's first students. Bob Bly said, among the Yaqui, in northern Mexico, for example, datura is taken by women to lessen the pain of childbirth. It is considered so powerful that it can only be handled by, quote, someone of authority. Bob Bly said, my collecting these plants was often accompanied with warnings that I would go crazy and die because I was mistreating them. Some of my indigenous colleagues refused to talk to me for several days afterwards. Toloache, that is datura, is widely added to mezcal, which is a distilled liquor from agave, not unlike tequila. In fact, tequila is a form of mezcal. We talked about this in the episode with ethnobotanist Gary Nabhan. Quote, as a catalyst and to induce a good feeling and visions. Some Mexicans prepare a fatty ointment containing seeds and leaves of toloache, that is datura, which is rubbed over the abdomen to induce visual hallucinations. So again, I highlight the danger with these plants and should only be used under a shamanic master. As I said, the most documented ethnobotanical use of Brugmansia is within the shamanic tradition. Indigenous shamans have utilized the plant as a sacred entheogen, a substance used to facilitate and induce spiritual experiences. These traditions consider Brugmansia to have a powerful plant spirit that can facilitate communication with the spirit world, and in some cases talk to the dead, enable divination and prophecy, diagnose spiritual causes of illness, initiate novice shamans into the spiritual dimension, and reveal hidden knowledge and secrets, and find lost objects. This is something often overlooked by people interested in the subject of hallucinogens and hallucinations. In shamanic cultures, hallucinogens are highly valued for finding lost objects. Amongst the Ngano and the Kamsa, these are the two tribes that inhabit the Sibundoy Valley, Brugmansia, particularly Brugmansia sanguinea, that's my favorite flower that I told you about, is used in initiation ceremonies for young men. The Hivaro have valued it in particular to communicate with ancestors and receive guidance for the future. Now, indigenous preparations of Brugmansia vary across these cultures, and what is the purpose intended for the ceremony, it's used in decoctions, that is, leaves, stems, and flowers boiled in water, infusions, plant material steeped in cold water, topical applications, like I mentioned, leaves crushed and applied directly to the skin, or mixed with other ingredients to create poultices, which is what's used to treat these diabetic ulcers. Inhalation, smoke from burned leaves or flowers inhaled, or combined in preparations like the example I gave you, where it's mixed with other psychoactive plants like tobacco or ayahuasca, and in some rare cases with coca. In Andean mythology, Brugmansia holds a special status as a plant associated with the transitions, thresholds, and communication between worlds. The Quechua, who are the descendants of the Incas, have traditionally viewed the plant as embodying a female spirit, which can be both nurturing and dangerous. Once again, we get back to that shamanic duality. Okay, I want to talk a bit about Schulte's work with these tropane alkaloids, and in particular Brugmansia and Datura. And this comes from our Schulte storybook map, which I strongly encourage you to check out on the web. And make sure you look at it on a computer, not on your iPhone, not on your iPad, because there's lots of bells and whistles which you can only access through the computer. On February 16th of 1942, while collecting with the great shaman Salvador Chindoy in the Sibundoy Valley, Schultes learned of an unusual variety of plant known as Borrachera culebra, which means the drunken snake. According to local shamans and taitas, the effects were so deeply transformative that a dose could put a person to sleep for 4 days. The plant had a variety of other uses as well. The leaves and flowers were heated in water to create an infusion which was used to relieve tumors, swollen joints, and persistent chills and fevers. Arthritis is very common in the cold heights of the Andes, and these plants are valued as a treatment for that arthritis. Borrachera culebra was one of many medicines derived from shrubs and trees of the genus Brugmansia, rich in tropane alkaloids and highly psychoactive. These plants were also referred to by some South American tribes as, quote, the tree of the evil eagle, and were grown and used by indigenous cultures from Colombia south to Chile, but no place harbored more varieties than Sibundoy. Schultes was astonished to note that no fewer than 11 varieties of borrachero were employed in Sibundoy. The rarest versions were typically cultivated in gardens near the houses of the most powerful and accomplished taitas, or shamans. Some of the species were dramatically different, highly atrophied forms, with thinner deformed leaves, likely the result of centuries of cultivation by the shamans of the Sibundoy. Another of the most formidable of the atrophied Brugmansia species was said to induce strong visions for up to 5 hours. Its leaves were so deformed they looked as if they had been eaten by caterpillars, and thus the plant was referred to as Munchiro borrachera, the drunken caterpillar, by local indigenous groups. A little bit of indigenous humor. Borrachera culebra was considered the most powerful and potent of the local medicines and the most favored hallucinogen of the Kamsa pages, or shamans, for both prayer and divination. Borrachera culebra appeared so dramatically different from other Brugmansia or Datura varieties that Schultes classified it as a new genus, Methysticodendron amesianum, named in honor of his botanical mentor Oakes Ames. The classification has been debated, with some suggesting that the atrophied appearance was the result of viral infection or mutation of a single gene. Today, the plant is most commonly referred to as Brugmansia aurea, hybrid culebra, a classification that Schultes himself agreed with later in life, as genetic research helped elucidate the relationship between the different varieties and species of plants. I want to finish today and talk about Schultes' work on Brugmansia, featured in his classic work, Plants of the Gods. He talked about the Misak peoples of the cloud forests of southwestern Colombia, also known as the Guambiano people. The Misak say, "How pleasant is the perfume of the long, bell-like flowers of the yas." The yas is what they call Brugmansia. "As one inhales it in the afternoon. But the tree has a spirit in the form of an eagle, which has been seen to come flying through the air and then to disappear. The spirit is so evil that if a weak person stations himself at the foot of the tree, he'll forget everything, feeling up in the air as if on wings of the spirit of the yas. If a girl sits resting in the tree's shade, she will dream about men of the Paez tribe, and later a figure will be left in her womb, which would be born 6 months later, in the form of the seeds of this tree. Schulte said that the hallucinogenic use of Brugmansia may have come from knowledge of the closely related Datura, since knowledge of the original pre-Columbian people that crossed the Bering Strait or sailed down the coast of the Americas may have had that knowledge from similar-looking flowers in the Old World. As they migrated southward, they encountered other species of Datura, especially in Mexico, and bent them to their shamanic use. Upon arriving in the Andes of South America, they recognized the resemblance of Brugmansia to Datura and found the psychoactive properties very similar. At any rate, everything about the use of Brugmansia bespeaks great antiquity. Little is known of the pre-conquest use of Brugmansia. The French ethnobotanist de la Condamine, who I'll do a special episode on, was first French ethnobotanist in tropical South America, mentions its use of the Amagua peoples of the upper Amazon. The great explorers von Humboldt and Bonpland remarked on Brugmansia sanguinea as a sacred plant of the people of Socomosa at the Temple of the Sun, north of Bogota. Brugmansia arborea, aurea, and sanguinea usually occur at an altitude above 6,000 feet, where their seeds are widely employed as an additive to chicha, that is, indigenous beer. The crushed leaves and flowers are prepared in hot or cold water to be made into a tea. Some Indians may scrape off the soft green bark and stems and soak it in water for medicinal use. As I've said earlier, all parts of the plants are useful because they contain tropane alkaloids. At Tunja, amongst the Muisca peoples north of Bogota, according to a report published in 1589, quote, a dead chief was accompanied to the tomb by his women and slaves, who were buried in different layers of earth, and so that the women and poor slaves should not fear their death before they saw the awful tomb, the nobles gave them things to drink, of inebriating tobacco and other leaves of the tree we call borrachero, that is, Brugmansia, all mixed in their usual drink, so that of their senses none is left to foresee the harm soon to befall them. The species employed were undoubtedly Brugmansia aurea and Brugmansia sanguinea. Perhaps no locality can equal the Valley of Sibundoy for Brugmansia use. The Kamsa and Ingano peoples use several species and a number of local cultivars as hallucinogens. The indigenous peoples of this region, particularly the shamans, have developed a knowledge of the effects of these plants and grow them as private possessions. Usually the property of specific shamans, these cultivars have native names. The leaves of Brugmansia aurea are employed mainly to relieve rheumatism, an effective medicine with its high concentration of tropane alkaloids. As I said, in the Andes of Colombia, there's a lot of rheumatism. Another was employed by hunters, with leaves and flowers were mixed with dog's food to enable them to find more game. I mentioned the importance of this ethnoveterinary study that indigenous peoples use plants and fungi to treat their animals, and that's very poorly documented to date. Again, quoting some of the indigenous peoples from the Andes, the plant contains a spirit so evil, our grandparents tell us, was in these trees with flowers like long bells, which give off their sweet perfume in the afternoon, that they were the food of those indigenous peoples at whose name people trembled, the fierce Pijaos. Culebra borrachera is thought by some botanists to be one of these monstrous cultivars. More potent than any of the cultivars of Brugmansia, it was used hallucinogenically for the most difficult cases of divination as an effective medicine for severe cases of rheumatic or arthritic pains. This is a quote from Schultes himself. Quote, from all viewpoints, species of Brugmansia have had a difficult time of it in spite of their great beauty. They are plants of the gods, but not the agreeable gifts of the gods like peyote, the mushrooms, or ayahuasca. Their powerful and wholly unpleasant effects, leading to periods of violence and even temporary insanity, together with their sickening after effects, have conspired to put them in a place of second category. They are plants of the gods, true, but the gods do not always strive to make life easy for man. So they give man the Brugmansias, to which he must on occasion repair. This evil eagle hovers over man, and his borrachero is an ever-present reminder that it is not always easy to attain an audience with the gods.
Thanks for listening to Plants of the Gods, hosted by ethnobotanist Mark Plotkin, president of the Amazon Conservation Team, which is on the web at www.amazonteam.org. Is there a plant you want to know more about? Let us know in the comments, and we might discuss it on a future episode of Plants of the Gods. And please support the Amazon Conservation Team, which brings you this podcast ad-free by going to our website. And please give us a top rating and recommend us to colleagues, friends, and family.